Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, and on today's episode, why I don't buy modern reissues of older classic albums. I did a video a while back on what it means when you hear the expression of first pressing of a record and why that's important to collectors. I'll leave that linked down below, but to summarize really quickly, the first pressing is when the album came out. If the album comes out in 1975, the record label prints 100,000 copies of it. That's the first pressing. Sometimes what labels will do as time goes on, then they repress it, they reissue it. Now I'm talking about modern reissues where they take a classic album from the 70s or the 80s and they put out a new version of it. This is lately with the vinyl record resurgence. This has a lot to do with it. They'll take Dark Side of the Moon, they'll take Back in Black or whatever, and they put it out again. And usually it's remastered. A lot of times it's from a digital source. Sometimes it's from the original analog source. And you might say, well, hey, this is a cleaned up version of it. You can get it. Why wouldn't you want that? Well, for me, there's a couple reasons. And what got me thinking about this was a episode recently from the YouTube channel The Contrarians, one of my favorite YouTube channels. Martin Popoff is on there a lot, and Martin's been here at the channel. Great author, has his History in 5 Songs podcast, one of my favorite podcasts. And the topic of the episode was, how do you take care of your records? And there was a bunch of people on the episode, and they were talking about the different ways that they clean and take care of and maintain their records. And Martin, I guess they went off on a little tangent, and Martin was talking about how he doesn't like to buy these modern reissues. He wants to have an original because these modern reissues kind of feel like an imitation of the original. And I can relate to that, and I understood that. And for me, there's a couple reasons why I like to have. Now, for me, it doesn't have to be a first pressing. And I'll give you an example here. My Highway to Hell is not a first pressing. And you can find this out by looking at the information on the record, or you can look inside what's called the dead wax here. There's numbers or the serial number that you see on the label or on the record. But this one's easy to know that it's not a first pressing because the sleeve that it comes in has Back in Black on it and has the older record. So I'm sure what happened here is Back in Black is a massive success. They go and they repress the entire AC/DC catalog. But for me, this is still released in, I don't know what exact year. This was probably 80, 81 that this was repressed again. But it's done during the analog era. So it's analog. I'm sure they use the original master tape. Some people will probably argue that, the first pressing sounds better. I talk about all this in that first pressing video. But for me, it doesn't have to be a first pressing for me. I just want it to come out during the analog era when vinyl was the main medium there, maybe along with cassettes. But there's no digital sourcing. CDs weren't even out yet when this came out. Now this is okay. So now where I do make the exception is just kind of two examples here. When it's something like this, Iron Maiden's Virtual 11, where this was probably released on vinyl when it came out. It came out in the 90s, but this is when vinyl wasn't as popular. They didn't press a lot of copies of it. It may not have been that great a quality. I don't know. This is a repress of this. They put these out, I don't know, somewhere in the last 10 years. But to get an original of this would cost a fortune because they didn't press a lot of them in the 90s. It was more of a collector's novelty thing almost in the 90s there when they were putting out vinyl. So it would be super expensive. I don't really like this album, but I want to have it in my collection because Iron Maiden's one of my big 6 bands, one of my favorite bands. I want to have all their stuff. So this is one of the occasions where I will buy a modern reissue, modern repress of a record. The other case would be when it's a band like this. And I think I did a video on this album. If I did, I'll leave a link down below. They're called Writing on the Wall, Power of the Picks. This is like a late 60s psych garage band. released very limited number of copies in 69 or 68, whenever this came out. Originally, they're worth an absolute fortune. Collectors, go crazy for this kind of stuff. Big time high roller collectors. I ain't paying $1,000 to get a copy of this. So this is a case where, somebody reissues it here. I'm totally fine with this in a case like this, because refining this, an original copy of this, would be very, very difficult and very expensive. So those are the two cases where I do make the exception. But in general, I want it to be an early pressing, let's call it that, for a few reasons. One is sort of for the sound. You hear me rant and rave about the loudness wars, and where the albums are dynamically crushed. There's no dynamics on them. These remasters, they're too bright, they're too loud, there's no dynamics. So I want them in their original dynamic analog form before the loudness wars was even an issue. Also, I like the idea, like I have this Kiss record, and I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure this is a first pressing or an early 70s pressing. I like the idea that this album at one point in time was in some teenager's bedroom, in the 70s. And in fact, I'm going to make a separate video on what I look for when I'm buying records. But this is one of those things that I like the idea that somebody at some point in time had this in their bedroom. In fact, I'll tell you a funny thing that I do sometimes. Sometimes I find records, and I think it was a Grand Funk record, where sometimes you'll see people will write their names and their address on the inside of the record. I don't like it when people write their names somewhere on the record, but sometimes you'll see it on the inside here. If it's like a clear paper thing like this, they'll write their name and address on it. And with technology, I was pretty sure it was a Grand Funk record. The person had their name and address in there, and I went and typed it in to like MapQuest or whatever, and it showed me their house. And I was so tripped out by, like, here was this record that I bought in Tampa, Florida, that at one point in time was inside that house, and it was like somewhere outside of Detroit, or Chicago or something like that. And somehow it's made its way from there all the way to Tampa, Florida, and now I have it. And it's just, I get such a kick out of the thought that at one point in time in the 70s, there was some teenager probably jamming that Grand Funk record at that house. And so there's the sound quality thing, and again, I just like it to be out in its original form, its original intended format. Martin mentions this, like he doesn't have any attachment to, like, he doesn't need Pantera on vinyl because he thinks of Pantera as like a CD band, and I get that too. And so that's another thing too, for some of the 90s and on, I think of those records more from CDs, so I don't really feel like I need to have them on vinyl. This is a rare exception because I'm a big Iron Maiden fan. So that's the reason for me. It's mostly a sound quality thing, and it's mostly I just wanted in the form that it was originally intended. So in the 60s, 70s, 80s, till we get to maybe the late 80s, vinyl was really the thing they were thinking of. That was the main medium, especially in the 70s. 8-tracks and cassettes were just kind of thought of as like a portable thing. They were really, when this Kiss album came out, this is what they were thinking of when they were putting it out. They were putting it out on vinyl, so I want it on those, what it was originally intended to be on, if you will. So that's why I always go for it. You can get, you can get a modern version of this, and some people may feel it sounds better, but for me, I like the original analog, the original intention, the way it was originally intended to be released. So, all right, there you go. Why I prefer originals over modern reissues and repressings. All right, let me know what you guys think down below. I totally get it. Why, especially nowadays, with prices. I mean, I started collecting in like 2000, buying records in like 2000, 99, 2000. And I was buying stuff like this for for like $4. So I was able to grab all this stuff. All my Iron Maiden I was paying like $8 for, but like classic rock stuff like this, $3 to $5 I was paying for it. And nowadays I have no idea what this probably goes for. You're going to probably have to pay $20, $30 at least for this, depending on the condition and all that stuff. And so I can understand why some people, when it gets put out and it's a new thing, and to get in a somewhat early pressing of it, you might have to pay $30 or $40, where you can buy a newer version of it for $25 or something like that. So I understand that, but that's me. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Till we see you again, and make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.